Welcome to Labor on the Job. I'm the host, Steve Zeltzer. Tonight we're going to be talking with an author from Northern California who is in the Writers Guild of America and is on strike about the strike and also about how he came to become a writer and what the issues are today for working people in this struggle. So joining us is James Dalessandro. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you, Stephen. Nice to be here.
Good. And James, you're from the Bay Area and you've been a trade unionist. Why don't you talk about your history a little bit?
Well, I've been a union member for many, many years. When I was 16 years old, I was raised in Cleveland, Ohio. I was a retail clerk when I was 16 years old. I worked in a grocery store for 2 years. And when I was 18, I became a Teamster like my father. My father spent 30 years in Cleveland, Ohio Teamsters Union, and I was a member of the Teamster and Dock Workers Union. And that's how I paid my way through college for 5 years.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, in southern Ohio, where I studied journalism. And I worked every summer, and I worked every Christmas and Easter. Whenever I got out of college for vacation, the day I got out of college, I'd drive home, and I worked nights loading trucks, loading on the docks. And I worked from the night I got home until the morning that I left on every one of my vacations, and the same thing in summers. And it was a good job, you know. We got paid overtime when we went overtime, and I was able to pay for a college education. It was hard work, you know, loading trucks. I think you'd lift 10 tons a night, you know, loading one of those huge tractor-trailer rigs. And in the morning, my father would drive them and the other drivers and deliver the goods. And like I said, I did that for 5 years, and it was a great job. And then I actually did a summer as a factory worker. I don't even remember what union that was. We were, I made cans for Continental Can Company.
Maybe the United Steelworkers.
Might have been a steelworker. I don't actually remember. I only did it for a summer. So those were the three unions. And then when I moved to Santa Cruz in 1972, after I got out of college, I think by 1974 I was a member of the Carpenters Union. I actually joined as a journeyman after 2 years of working non-union jobs. It was hard to get in the union, but I managed to get a job and got in the union. And I was in the Carpenters Union about 6 years. And then in 1982, in Los Angeles, I became a member of the Writers Guild of America. So I don't think there's really been a time in my life that I wasn't a member of a union or a guild, you know, a craft guild.
Well, how did you start writing? Why did you decide you wanted to become a writer?
Well, I actually started, I think, when I was about 7 years old. I was a voracious reader. I started reading comic books when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I think that's actually where I developed an interest in film, because comics, you know, you marry the images and the words together. You know, actually, it's a visualization, and that always appealed to me. And then I became a voracious reader of novels and newspapers. I read the newspaper every morning. It's kind of a dying habit or art form here in America. You know, every morning before I went to school, I read the newspaper, and every night when I got home, we got 2 newspapers a day.
The morning and the afternoon edition, absolutely.
Cleveland Plain Dealer in the morning and the Cleveland Press in the afternoon, and I read them cover to cover, you know. And then I started reading novels, I think, when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I remember very distinctly at the age of 12 or 13 reading Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and reading Leon Uris was my hero. Battle Cry, Mila 18, Exodus. I thought he was a terrific writer. I loved, that's where I developed, I think, my interest in historical writing was from Leon Uris more than anyone. And I think at the age of 7 or 8, Steve, a teacher looked over my shoulder and read a paper that I was writing and sent a note to my mother, said this kid should be a writer. You know, his English skills and his composition skills are superior to some of the 12th graders here, you know. I unfortunately believed her, you know? And here I am.
So you got into the union, and the union has obviously changed as a result of technology and communication. What changes have been in the union since you've been a member?
Well, it's been an interesting period. I really started a brief more segue. In 1973 through 77, I founded the Santa Cruz Poetry Festival with Allen Ginsberg, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti was one of the founders. Ken Kesey was one of my best friends. It was the nation's largest literary event. And at the age of 23, I think about the third time I read from my poems and short stories, There were 2,000 people out there, and I followed Allen Ginsberg and went right before my friend Ken Kesey, and it did very well. And I remember getting really a thunderous ovation one night, and then later on at the University of Oregon Poetry Festival with Ken Kesey, 3,500 people there. That was heady stuff for a 23 and 24-year-old, and that really solidified me wanting to be a writer. So when I got in 1982, I think it was the very next year, I joined the Writers Guild of America in Los Angeles, sold my first screenplay in 1983. I was working as a bartender, going to UCLA Film School, and I sold my first screenplay. Big day, my mother happened to be in town. I remember going down to the Guild, and there was $1,500. I got a check for $10,000 from Motown in the mail. You know, it said, we love your script, and we sent your lawyer the contract, and here's your check, and go down to the
That was a big day. That was a big day.
My mother cried. Seriously, my mother cried. $1,500 it cost me. And signed up, and they gave me, we got a credit union. I went out and bought a car, my first new car later on, and it was pretty wonderful stuff, So shortly thereafter, Steve, I think it was in '85, shortly thereafter, we had a very short strike in the Writers Guild. I don't even remember what the issues were. I think it was wages, I think, were a big issue. But by 1985 and 1988 were really the galvanizing periods. Because in 1985, and this is a big issue in this strike, this is one of the big issues. In 1985, there was something called home video, VHS and beta, remember the little beta cam things? And the Writers Guild leadership negotiated with the motion picture studios, which by then had all been bought by corporations. Gulf and Western was the first one in the 70s that bought Paramount. And all of a sudden, the big corporations realized, well, there's a lot of money in this. And a lot of that money came from this home video explosion. Mm-hmm. And so what they said to us was, we don't know how big this is going to get, so we'll give you a little tiny piece. They gave us 0.3% of the wholesale.
That is a tiny bit.
0.3% on a $15 video cassette or DVD. We now get 4 cents. The man who wrote Chinatown, Robert Town, he would get 4 cents on a DVD. It's crazy. But they said, well, let's find out how this goes. And if it goes well, we'll renegotiate. Well, they have fastidiously refused to renegotiate since 1985. So 2007, so it's been 22 years.
So that's a long time of really lost income, which you should have been getting.
Yeah, and this is part of the issue, Steve, is that a lot of writers stay alive on their residuals and payments, residuals for foreign sales of the films and television they write, that home video. I believe last year the home video market worldwide was $43 billion. It's actually bigger than the box office. It used to be the box office, whatever went through the movie theater, that was it.
Now it's the home video, which is the big chunk of money in distribution.
Correct. Correct, and foreign as well. The domestic box office is now about 20% of the total take from these films. And there are movies that are not very successful in the movie theaters that make money and earn their cost back with DVD. There's no more VHS, but the DVD market. And also now with all the cables, premium cable, home box office, Showtime, all of those. And then again, the foreign market, and foreign you have theatrical, you have DVD, you have all that stuff. So there's a huge piece of the pie out there. And like I said, we're getting 4 cents. What we asked for when the strike began, we went on strike November the 5th, what we asked for was to double that to 8 cents. Now that's not that's not a lot of money on a $15 DVD.
But I think it's the principle of it, though.
It is the principle that we have, the idea, all writers, as you well know, make royalties and live on their royalties. I'm a book writer. I've published 4 books, including 1906.
Which is going to be a movie? Is that
Yes. It's in production now at Pixar. Brad Bird, who directed Ratatouille, wrote and directed Ratatouille, which is a huge success. It's done like $600 million. And he also did The Incredibles, which was a marvelous animated show. He's now making his live-action debut at Pixar, and he's rewriting the script. and directing 1906, and Pixar is now in the live-action film business on that one. But anyway, like you said, the DVD thing, well, my attitude is this to it. We wanted 4 cents more on the DVD. I mean, they could have easily just tacked 4 cents onto the price. I mean, I could imagine somebody going in and say, wow, I wanted to buy Chinatown, but the price went up 4 cents. I'm not going to purchase this. Writers of books, I get approximately 10% of the retail price of the book. My paperback of 1906 is $14. So I think it's 9% of that. I get about $1 a book. Well, in the Writers Guild of America, at any one time, we have as much as 80% unemployment, because you sell a movie, and then you spend time looking to sell another movie or to get hired on another movie, or you work on a television show for a year or 2 years or 3 years. There's no guarantee, Steve.
So it's mostly a contract worker. You work by contract.
Yes, you're a contract worker, exactly.
That's right.
Almost like a piece worker.
That's right.
Right, and you go from job to job. So those residuals, those little streams of revenue, keep writers and their families alive in between the jobs that they earn. So without that money, you'd lose a lot of writers who are actually probably pretty good writers, you know, and then you got to start all over.
So basically, the owners, which are really multinational corporations now,
yes,
are saying, you know, we're going to take a hard line, and basically you're not going to do it, and we want to take away from what you have, you know, and that kind of thing. So was the union prepared for this strike?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we elected some new leadership last year. The president of the union is a man named Patrick Verone, who I consider a friend. He and I are pretty friendly. And we felt that the old leadership was given in a little too easy on some of these issues. And we wanted a stronger, more forceful, more determined leadership.
Well, you're falling behind. I mean, your actual benefits, it seems, with this low percentage, means you're losing income for your members.
Yeah, and it creates a lot of hardship. Mark Cherry, the guy who created Desperate Housewives, I think he said once that he earned approximately $75,000 in residuals on some TV work that he had done. Well, those residuals kept him alive until he created Desperate Housewives, which has now become a very successful show, and obviously given him a substantial income. But if it wasn't for those little drips and drabs in between, you know, he might have had to do something else. You know, you hear writers all the time that leave town or go somewhere else, and
so the survival of writers, a lot of writers, is really what we're talking about. Their ability to be writers.
Yes, and it would seem to me, I mean, if you were a multinational corporation and you had some people who were extremely bright and were creating products for you that brought your corporation hundreds of millions of dollars and eventually billions of dollars, giving them some small pieces of that to keep them alive and keep them in the game and keep them creating these potentially blockbuster films, it's just business sense. I mean, there's a point, I think, where you're cutting your own throat, you know, and that, I believe emphatically that's what's happening. You know, you can overdo this to the point where you're costing yourself
But
money.
it seems like they have a kind of an ideological stance, that they're not going to recognize the importance or the strength of the writers. I mean, why wouldn't they? If we're talking really of chicken feed. I mean, we're not talking large amounts of money. I mean, what is it?
Well, I think, in all honesty, that there has been a long-term denigration of the contribution of writers to American film. It's become, was it Francois Truffaut in My French is Awful, the auteur theory that the director creates the entire movie. Well, I respect and admire great directors. I directed an award-winning documentary. I'm about to direct my first feature. And I know how difficult it is and how talented some of these great directors are. But without David Webb Peoples, there would be no Unforgiven. Whatever wonderful things Clint Eastwood did, including getting the movie made, nobody else anywhere in the world could have gotten the film made. It was David Webb Peoples, the writer, who sat down and created...
it's the ideas. It's the thoughts behind what's being produced on the screen, isn't it?
Yeah, you sit down and out of the thin air, out of nothing, you create a whole world, a whole universe, a certain rhythm and a certain style. Now that's interpreted and expanded by directors and actors and wonderful cinematographers and set decorators. But you notice everybody walking around in a movie set has a script under their arm. And in that script are the clues to what it should look like and what it should sound like, hopefully. You know, the period that it exists, and you look up the music from that particular period. So the exact opposite is true in television. Television is a writer's medium. American television has gotten incredibly good in the last 5 to 10 years. First with HBO, with Sex and the City and The Sopranos, and now FX has become a marvelous channel with Rescue Me, Dennis Leary's series. A wonderful show called The Riches with Minnie Driver and Eddie Izzard.
So cable has been a boon, really, to writers.
Absolutely. And it is a writer's medium. Whenever you heard the Sopranos cast being interviewed, and they would say, what's the secret to the show? And they said, the writers. They said, all these marvelous characters. They said, we couldn't wait to get the script, first to find if we were in this week's show, because it was an ensemble and sometimes they weren't, but also if we were, what crazy, wonderful things we were going to do.
So this excitement, really,
yeah,
a lot of it was due to the writers, their development and of characters and plots and that kind of thing.
Television is run by writers. Dick Wolf, who created the Law and Order franchise, Law and Order SVU, another spin-off, Law and Order CI. He's a writer. He started as a writer. Neil Baer, who's the head of, who's the showrunner, it's called, the man who runs the show, the head writer of Law and Order SVU, is the head of the Writers Guild of America Negotiating Committee. He's one of our main negotiators in this particular strike. Boston Legal is run by David, excuse me, his name escapes for a moment. He's created a lot of really wonderful shows. Stephen Bochco, who created L.A. Law and NYPD Blue.
So the union, it seems, the writers' union now is pretty solidified that this issue of getting a fairer share of the profits that are being made is something that is fundamental and that you're going to fight to the whatever.
Well, I've been in this union now I think this is my 24th or 25th year. I've never seen such unity and such spirit in this guild. There's a couple other issues. Obviously the DVD issue is a big one. Well, what's happening is we're seeing a repeat of that, Stephen, is now it's called new media. And everybody is, not everybody, but many people are of the opinion the next medium of delivery is going to be the internet. Video on demand.
Downloading videos like music is downloaded now.
Yes.
It'll all be downloaded.
Exactly. And whether you download and create a library or you just access it, pay a fee, video on demand, whether you download and actually own that, or you just pay like a rental fee rather than going to the corner store for a rental, or Netflix sending you the DVD, you can essentially access through your computer any movie that's ever been made that's been transferred to DVD. And they're offering, the last offer that we got was if they showed a film that I wrote or one of my associates wrote, or a television show, for the first 6 weeks, the writer would get nothing for all the downloads. If 1 million people or 2 million or 3 million downloaded that, they get nothing. Then there would be a one-time fee of $250 for the use of that material throughout the rest of our lives. Now, as I said, as a novelist, I make $1 for every book that's sold. A Broadway playwright or writer of a musical gets paid, every dollar goes to the box office, he gets a little piece of it. So a journalist, Steve, if a journalist writes a newspaper article and it's syndicated through the Associated Press,
he gets some money.
They get half.
Well, this arrogance that they have, where does it come from? That they think that you shouldn't get a percentage of what you're producing, a reasonable percentage.
Well, I think two things. I do believe there has been a constant denigration of the work contribution of writers. Writers don't want anybody else's credit. We know what Jack Nicholson does. We know what Martin Scorsese does. But great writers, Patty Chayefsky, who wrote Network and Hospital and all those things. Again, without that genius of those guys, there wouldn't be any of that stuff. If Dick Wolf wasn't a brilliant writer who created the Law and Order franchise, wouldn't be a Law and Order. So all writers want is a decent living and a tiny amount of respect for what it is that they do. And there's a couple other issues. Again, the new media issue is a big one. But also we have a couple of areas in which writers are not represented, particularly in animation. It used to be there was one animation studio, that was Disney. And so when the contracts were made with the Writers Guild of America, Disney just held out. They were the only one. Well, now you've got scores, if not hundreds, of animation studios around the world. And the animation writers are not covered. They don't get anything on the DVD and the foreign sales. If the movie goes through the roof and they don't have profit participation, they don't get anything. So I know a couple of big-time animation writers who no longer will write animation. So they're robbing themselves of some of their best talent because they don't want to give them a little
Sure.
piece. And in the Los Angeles Times, a really terrific writer named Patrick Goldstein said that he believes that the studios not only don't want to give us, it's not the studios, it's the corporations that own
the studios, the multinationals that own the studios. Yeah.
They not only don't want to give us more, they want to take away what they've already given us because they feel that we're paid enough money for the scripts when we get them. We shouldn't be entitled to any additional revenues, which would make movie writers, if that were true, if that happened, would make movie and television writers the only writers in any major medium in the Western world who don't profit when their work proliferates and turns huge profits.
Well, isn't this also going to affect the rest of the industry? If the new media and getting a percentage, a decent percentage, is going to transfer also to actors and other workers in the industry?
Well, yes, you're exactly right. Our strongest ally in this entire effort is the Screen Actors Guild, SAG. The president of the Screen Actors Guild, Alan Rosenberg, wrote a letter about a week ago, and he said that the 120,000 members of SAG stand 100% with the writers. Nobody respects us more than the actors do, because we're the ones who create those characters. Well, the first thing they do is read that script.
Well, you're a team. I mean, you work together.
We love actors. Absolutely love them. They're out there taking the risks and crying on camera, and and if anybody looks foolish or does a poor job, they're likely to take the brunt of the criticism. One bad role can do serious damage to their careers. And writers can always write. I mean, we can always sit down and write. Actors can only act when somebody hands them a job or gives them a contract. So their lives are even, a lot of them. You have a lot of people who only work small jobs and supporting roles.
So it's very precarious.
Very precarious to them. And they're in the same situation. They don't get very much money on DVDs and foreign sales and stuff like that. I personally would like to see the Writers Guild of America and the Screen Actors Guild form an alliance and ask for similar treatment.
Now,
I think it's crucial.
One of the issues that has come up in the course of this struggle is, and there's some discussion about, there was an article in the LA Times, is the possibility of the writers starting to produce and distribute some of their own material. In other words, using this new media, internet, to start distributing their own thing. What is your ideas about that? What do you think about that?
I'm all for writers taking control of their lives and the hate to call it a product, it seems so impersonal, but there's a business aspect to it too. I'm all for this. Billy Wilder once said that someone asked if he was a director who wrote or a writer who directs. He said, I'm a writer who directs. If I could get Frank Capra or to direct all my films, I would never direct. He said, but you become a director and a producer for two reasons. First of all is to protect the material that you believe in, the stories and the characters you believe in. But second of all, Stephen, is the business model. I've been on a campaign here in Northern California to try to create work by developing a series or a couple of series here. When Nash Bridges was here, it pumped $30 million a year into the economy. I know a unit production manager and a director who worked steadily for 5 years. Last I saw him, he was painting an art gallery for whatever he was making, $15 an hour down in Carmel. And this guy's a talented guy with 30 years in the business. I know editors and people who go to Romania and go to South Carolina just to work, man. Don't sleep with their wives and don't see their children and for weeks and sometimes months.
When the industry could be here. People could be working here.
It should be here, Stephen, with all this incredible talent we have here. Do you know how many actors there are, terrific actors, living in Northern California? They call this Hollywood North. The number of writers and cinematographers and editors. There is an amazing talent bank here. What we need to do is the creative part of the equation, and I'm really devoted to this, and this enormous business community we have here. All the Silicon Valley and all those people. If we could just have a little meeting of the minds between some of the writers and directors here, and they're brilliant people here, and some of those folks, we could put this place on the map overnight, and it wouldn't be that difficult. I think it's this whole situation with the strike is pushing us in that direction.
Okay, well, what do you think is going to be the outcome? I mean, you're not a stargazer, but if you could, you think you're going to beat them? I mean, it seems like they're pretty intransigent positions right now in this whole struggle. But they need the writers. Well, if they're going to write it, if you hold together,
yeah, they do need the writers. And what's happening is the writers and directors are talking, and they've never had the coziest relationship. Well, we do have 1,400 members of the Directors Guild who are also members of the Writers Guild. So we have a lot of people who are firmly entrenched over there and are being heard. Second of all, the Screen Actors Guild, their support has been enormous. What I'm hopeful is happening is that the power of public opinion, the power of all these guilds and unions in San Francisco Labor Council is on our side. We had the professional office employees. Teachers and nurses are on our side.
So there's a lot of solidarity.
Yes.
And that's going to help you.
Yeah, there's a lot of solidarity, and I think that I think the position on the other side is a little foolish. And I think that's going to wear thin. I think it's important. I'm not a big kind of rhetoric, name-pointing, name-calling, finger-pointing kind of guy. I do think it's foolish, and that's probably the most bombastic statement I would make. I think it's self-defeating. I think when you push people in corners and you raise the rhetoric, it makes it difficult for people to come to their senses and reconcile. I don't have any bad feelings toward everybody on the other side. I just think it's unnecessary, and I think it's self-defeating, and I think they've already cost themselves a lot of money.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for joining us tonight, James. We didn't get a chance to talk about what labor should do nationally to transform the situation, but maybe we can get to that some other time. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay.